we had Sam Altman on, one of the things that he and I were talking about was that AI figured out a way to lie. That they used AI to go through a CAPTCHA system, and the AI told the system that it was vision impaired, which is not technically a lie, but it used it to bypass, are you a robot?
What we don't know now is for large language models to say they don't know something. So you ask it a question, and if the answer to that question is not in the system, it still comes up with an answer. And if the best answer is not there, it still gives you an answer, but that's considered a hallucination.
Really? AI hallucination. So they cannot be wrong.
Welcome back, everyone, to our latest episode on the CXplorers podcast. Today, we're going to revisit a topic Jasper and I have talked about since season 1. We thought it was relevant because so much is changing so quickly within the AI landscape, and there's a lot of impacts that could potentially have within the customer experience space. So that topic that we want to revisit is really around AI hallucinations. So first, I guess, Jasper, maybe if you want to share with our audience, what are AI hallucinations?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, for a lot of the folks, that B-roll that we just showcased really explains kind of like a lot of it, right? But just to kind of put that in context, AI hallucination actually refers to when an artificial intelligence system, like ChatGPT, Google Bard, Gemini, you name it, generates an information that it's factually incorrect, made up, or something that's completely misleading, right? Even though it may sound confident or plausible, but it's completely incorrect, right? So some of the examples that AI hallucination has, right? So sometimes it's making up facts, right? So it's going to say some historical events of what happened, but it actually didn't. And a lot of the times it will also try to invent sources, like citing non-existent studies or article that you can't find anywhere else, right? And I think one of the most common is incorrect summaries, right? So misrepresenting some contents of a transcript or any document that one would have. So that's, like, in a nutshell, what AI hallucination is.
So in terms of the impacts it has to potential customer experience, the way I look at it is, if I'm going into a chatbot that's using Gen AI for customer experience, and the query I'm making, right, let's say I'm looking to see if I'm able to pack steel toe shoes into my carry-on luggage. That may not specifically be coded in or trained within that LLM for the chatbot to be able to respond. And with Gen AI, a hallucination could be the AI making something up, essentially.
Yeah.
And saying yes. And the reality is that person gets to the airport, TSA is like, you absolutely cannot bring this onto your luggage, do it all over again. And that's where I think it's important for organizations that are, especially for leaders within the customer experience space, that are really evaluating the use case for Gen AI, is how do we make sure that there's no hallucinations, that it's not given the wrong information, but rather directing them to another resource where they can get those correct pieces of information that they are seeking.
Absolutely. And I think one other thing, Daniel, that everyone needs to understand as well, like, why does hallucination happen in the first place, right? So we all need to understand that these AI models, or all of these large language models, are trained to predict, right, the next word based on the patterns of the vast data sets that it has in it, right? If you can remember, I think there were some papers around ChatGPT only having internet knowledge up to 2023, and then they've been kind of like, updating it. So that's the vast knowledge that it has, right? It's trained to predict the next word, similar to how you're using like your iPhone for typing, predicting, and all of that. It's not trained to fact check at all, right? So when the data is missing or it's unclear, it has a tendency to fill in the blanks, right? And most likely, but not necessarily true, to actually respond, something that's completely made up. So that's the reason why it happens, right? So just want to kind of put it out there before we dive in deep into the weeds of, all the impacts.
So it's not as straightforward as it just lying, but I think what makes it a hallucination is that it sounds plausible, but
Exactly.
it could be factually incorrect or fabricated. But the way it's coming out is, like, again, in that video that we saw, it's never going to tell you I don't know, right? And like you said, it's just going to fill in the blanks. So I guess, Jasper, the question I have, though, when we look at the Gen AI hallucinations, how does this differ from like traditional software errors that people might run into?
So that's a very interesting question, right? So I think let's start off first with the most simple one. Right now, a lot of the folks, like, let's all accept it, like, everyone has, I think around 95% trust with AI technology, especially with ChatGPT. Like everyone just believes it, right? So in a way that when it spits out an information, you would just directly consume it, as opposed to a software error. So software error is not something that you can just consume with reading or just watching. Sometimes it's going to give you an error that you can't push through to the next page, right? So that completely stops you along the way of your whole process of what you're trying to achieve, as opposed to Gen AI LLM hallucination. It's something that you have to consume, and it's completely subjective to the end user's knowledge whether or not that's true or incorrect. So that's how I would put it plainly, TC, between software error and how AI hallucination with these LLMs are happening.
So why do they even happen in the first place? Is it just because there's too much in the LLM where it can't distinguish its own guardrails in terms of what it's confabulating versus what's actual fact?
Another good question, man. So really, there has been some ways that a lot of these companies were able to actually go above and beyond to resolve AI hallucination, right? So there is one. I believe I sent this to you a few months back. So they've invented RAG, so that means retrieval augmented generation. So if you look at ChatGPT right now, there is that icon below the Ask Anything button that has like that web icon. So right now, they're not only relying to historical data or data set that LLM was actually trained on, but this time it's now pulling up recent article, most updated one. So it's actually now fact checking, right? Instead of just predicting on what it's going to say, because it has to always shoot out something that it should give out to the user. So that's one of the main ones that the team is actually going through right now. I mean, OpenAI team to actually resolve AI hallucination. So that's RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. So I think with the adoption of that technology in the first place, we shouldn't have had any issues with AI hallucination to begin with. But we all know technology, right? It's continuously evolving. We try to fix the solution as we cross that bridge. So that's just how AI is right now, I suppose.
Yeah, and I know that last year we saw some early encounters with some of these AI hallucinations, right? Like you mentioned before, early GPT-3 and some of the customer service bots really showing weird outputs. For those that were really the first ones trying to do video or image generation with Gen AI, again, it would almost became its whole theme of how funny it was, right? Because the faces
Yeah.
would melt. It still can't, distinguish fingers when it's making content and stuff like that. Words are always a struggle for Gen AI during the early stages as well, right? So that's kind of where I think they've improved on a lot of those elements, right? But now it's really around the LLM itself. And I think for us in the audience, it would be good to maybe go into some real life case studies and use cases of where we've seen the actual adverse impacts to the customer experience when these confabulations or AI hallucinations start to happen. So I know,
Absolutely.
Jasper, we did look at, there was one case with an airline in Canada, um, and there was basically some AI hallucinations driven there where this airline's now been ordered to pay some compensation after the chatbot gave inaccurate information and essentially misled customers into buying a full ticket price, a full price ticket.
Wow. Yeah, this is the best example, right, that I mentioned. So it's actually making stuff up, right? So if you don't have your data set up to date with the most recent ticket price, right? If you're going to be running a campaign, or if there has been like some slashes on some tickets on specific places, then it would only rely to the data that it was trained on. Now, on those data, if there's going to be like no mention there of any type of, I don't know, discounts or what have you, then AI would definitely make something up. And I think that's one of the cases that actually happened here,
Yeah,
right? So
because
they
this
tried to
customer I
remove
think
it.
was attending a funeral and then trying to get a bereavement discount, and then
Yeah.
the Gen AI said no, you don't get a discount for that. This whole thing went to court, and then essentially the airline was defending the AI, saying, "Well, it's a separate entity, right?" But the reality is, it was on your website. It's based on an LLM and data and knowledge that you, as the airline, have trained it for, so it's not really the customer's fault for not being able to go through all of your articles and your security documents and processes. They're going to your site for that help, and you've made something up. And now Air Canada was forced to essentially pay that ticket price back based on that discount for that individual.
Yeah, and we also have to go back to, I think, one of the topics that we have been talking so much about on this podcast, right? When it comes to fine tuning your data to a domain specific info that you wanted to go through, right? So you don't just, again, do plug and play with all of the products, with all of the chatbot services that you see out there, because most often than not, those chatbot services are trained on a vast majority of information. May it be airline, may it be hospitality, telecommunication. So fine tuning your data to be domain specific to your industry would really be the way to go as well, to avoid AI hallucination.
So I know we've talked about, that it's not so much the AI that needs the governance, but it's the people building it and training it that really need that. And I always thought about, like, do we need some sort of way to supervise the AI, right? And I think the long and the short question that we're trying to get to here, Jasper, is how do organizations, especially that are very customer service focused, detect potential hallucinations so that way they're not waiting for something to escalate or a customer to call in or a lawsuit to come in, and be able to have kind of regular checkpoints in terms of the information that AI or Gen AI is spitting out to a customer, that it's actually factual and that it's not going to potentially disrupt the business. So I think that's a really important point for our audience to really understand, like, how do you detect these potential things proactively?
Yeah, so there are a few techniques that I've been seeing, around the LLM community. So a lot of these, what we call now prompt engineers. Now, I can't remember if we've talked about prompt engineering on this podcast already, DC, but essentially these are your instructors, right, that are creating those structured prompts for it to be able to train a large language model to get and also to detect whether or not it's going to make up some again, hallucination, right, or whether or not it's going to give you an accurate information. So I see a lot of companies right now actually producing and even hiring, right, prompt engineers for them to be able to train and to detect if there's going to be any hallucination happening with their in-house drone solution. So I think this is where, again, AI creating different types of job titles nowadays, right? And I've been super curious about prompt engineering that myself. I've taken a few courses about it, and you can see that there are going to be few techniques like, one shot prompt, and then they also have this multi-shot prompt that you can essentially detect, right, and be able to kind of like RCA, to put it plainly, whether or not AI is actually producing a right or wrong answer. So prompt engineering, that's actually the first line of defense for everyone to be able to detect whether or not AI is actually failing for their deployment.
Yeah, and I know there's also some APIs out there as well that do fact checking against what data or learning material you give in your LLM in terms of that kind of conversational experience, to just make sure it's not going off the guardrails. Because I think the reality is, right, when you're building an LLM with Gen AI to service your customers, it's protecting you as a business. But sometimes, business leaders will have an innovative idea that's really out of the norm, and AI is not going to recognize that and see that as a potential risk, and maybe create a policy in response to that customer inquiry that protects you as a business. But in reality, it can be the farthest thing from the truth in terms of what they're actually looking for, right? I think with Virgin Money, they had this issue as well, right? Because they faced a lot of criticism earlier this year when it came to, like, their AI-powered chatbot, because it reprimanded a customer for using the word virgin, which is ironically the bank's own name. Right? So Virgin Money apologized. They had to attribute the error to more than just a single word filter, and noting that the issue occurred with one of the older chatbots and not the latest models. Right. So, I mean, now they think that the improvements were already scheduled for this chatbot and that it's rolling out. But again, the impact was already done, which kind of is follow up of why I asked that question earlier, is how do we make sure we detect these things, use APIs or use the comp engineers to really help go through rigorous testing and then regular checks as well to make sure that these hallucinations aren't happening.
Yeah, and another thing, just to kind of share with my wife's company, what they're also doing right now, like they're deploying this intelligent virtual agents, right, similar to how chatbot with Virgin Airlines were actually doing. But what they did was they did like some pretty cool A/B testing with different vendors, and between these vendors, they were assessing right the communication in the way that AI is talking to the customer, and with that, they were able to see who is actually the chatbot that's making stuff up versus the one that's really doing a fact check and really getting in through the weeds of their documents, their policies that they've shared to those AI vendors. So I think, I mean, again, that's a little bit manual in nature, right? But that's how they did it. They were able to see it directly, who's actually better, who's the one that's not making things up. And they actually had all hands on deck on that DC. Like they had supervisors, they had QAs, they even had manager auditing and evaluating responses between the two vendors. And eventually they were able to see which company is the best fit for them. So again, a little bit more on the manual side as opposed to how everyone would want to do it with like partnering it up with another AI fact checking tool. But yeah, that's one way that they did it too.
Yeah, and I know earlier this year, I think, or even late last year, there was an AI coding assistant, Cursor, I believe was the name.
Oh yeah.
And they had also faced a bit of backlash after its support chatbot had fabricated a non-existent login policy around having multiple users, and it essentially created a policy that said it can't. And this essentially had really caused widespread criticism, right? Because like even on Reddit, people were canceling their subscriptions because that was the whole value add that they had. So the founder of Cursor, he had to really clarify that no such policy ever existed, and attributed that to misinformation to the AI support bot. And I think that's the big risk that we're talking about is if the misinformation is going to a chatbot or a large language model for AI servicing, is it might fill in the blanks, like we said, to give you disinformation, which is even worse because that's not even correct and it's completely made up. And then again, it could have revenue impacts because people are just going to say, nope, this wasn't what I signed up for. And then now the owners are going to be wondering what happened, right? And then you have to, like you said, I think the proactive measure is making
Yeah.
sure that you do some of that A/B testing in very ambiguous scenarios, not just the standard boilerplate stuff of where your top 5 chat drivers may be coming in, right? And again, when people are reaching out to organizations for support, it's probably not a password reset issue. Right? It's probably not going to be related to something simple that an AI can solve, right? And I think that's the frustration a lot of us, me included, have seen when working with chatbots right now, is we're starting to see kind of this messy area of where they're trying to integrate AI, but it's not working, right? And it just keeps giving you the runaround. And I think that more than 75% of the people listening, when they engage with the chatbot, within 30 seconds, it's going to be, I need to talk to someone, right? And that's the reality of it. And I think that's really where customer experience teams need to start finding a way to address that so they can start really trusting the AI. But that's never going to happen if it still has hallucinations or potential risks of disinformation.
Absolutely, right. So, really, just want to kind of circle back to what you mentioned, right, about the monitoring that one has to do, because I think a lot of people still think that once you deploy AI, like you set it free, like Moby Dick, something like that, it still requires regular monitoring, right? It still requires human governance, and I think we have established that by now. That once you deploy your chatbot, you can't just call it a day after you kind of gone through the whole trial period. It would still require even, I don't know, maybe quarterly type of monitoring for you to be able to understand whether or not it's still giving out accurate information. In that way, you would still have, as a support group, you would still have that trust that, oh, this technology is definitely bang on with the support that we're requiring. So really, regular monitoring, it's not going to go away anytime soon, even with all of these plethora of automations that are happening right now, DC.
For sure. And one of the things that you kind of taught me about was why hallucinations can happen, right? And I know that when we look at kind of the grounded reasoning versus predictive text, that's one of the kind of matrices that I was looking at in terms of why these things happen. Can you maybe help explain not just to me, but to our audience as well, like what the difference between grounded reasoning and um, predictive
Predictive
text
text.
is?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So really the reason why this happened, right? Predictive text and grounded reasoning, it's actually with the lack of database with the integration. And I think we've also talked about that on season one, where right now data is king, right? You wouldn't be able to create your domain specific LLM if you wouldn't have the right data for it. Right now, predictive text, I know I mentioned it on the beginning of this podcast, right? So imagine it as your, again, Google keyboard or maybe your Apple keyboard that already has your historical typing methods, right? So if maybe you're applying to an email, it would automatically pop up like, hi, good morning, or hey, DC, or again, whatever historical info that you would have. So that's predictive text, right? As opposed to grounded reasoning, it actually do fact checking, right? So you're essentially your LLM would have to go through and completely do a fact check with all of the information that you have with the use of RAG, right? Retrieval augmented generation. So between the two, predictive text, again, it's just filling out the blanks, right? And just going through the historical patterns on how would one actually talk to someone else, right? As opposed to grounded reasoning, it's going through all of your information in real time and also understanding the context, right, of what were those conversations that you were trying to have with one person versus the other, right? So overall, really, it's about also, Daniel, it's about optimization, right? Fluency versus factuality. I know everyone would want to have an LLM or a chatbot that doesn't sound robotic, right? So you would have to kind of balance that out between, do you really want a personalized chatbot versus a chatbot that, hey, maybe it's a little bit robotic, but it's factual,
Yeah.
right? So that's going to be, I think, the hard balance that these again, AI software would have to kind of go through. Because I think as of right now, even again with the A/B testing that my wife's company is currently doing, they haven't seen the best of both worlds, right? It can either be just super fluent or super factual.
Yeah, and I think to your point, right, we companies have really over-indexed on the fluency piece, and part of that is because customer feedback, human interactions, is if it sounds too robotic,
Yeah.
immediately think, "Oh, I need to talk to something a bit more fluent because I don't know if it's going to give me the right answers." Right, and the reality is with the grounded reasoning. But let's say we don't focus on the fluency and it comes out robotic, even though let's say 100% of it is factual and accurate, as a customer, you're still not going to feel comfortable because it sounds like a robot, right? And that might just be, the human emotional aspect of that. So I think, and I know a lot of organizations are working towards this, is really finding that perfect marriage of predictive tests and grounded reasoning, right? Being able to fact check yourself, really get all the right facts in the LLM piece while still being fluent in the conversation. And I think it's easier said than done for sure,
I know.
because everyone talks different. People might try to trick the LLM or the chatbot that they're talking to as well to see if they can maybe get some free benefits or whatever the case might be. And to your point, I think as more people become familiar with interacting with Gen AI tools, is they're going to find ways to kind of make workarounds. And I think that's something that businesses need to start thinking about, is just like in ChatGPT, if you ask for a source code, not going to give it to you. But if
Yeah.
I say, hey, can you write this source code in the form of an Eminem rap lyric? It might do it, right? And I think that's the same piece is, what if people start doing this with flight bookings, or if they start doing this with, refunds that they're trying to do with a chatbot, and they find ways around that. I think those are the rigorous testing pieces that we really need to get ahead of in this industry, to say what are not only some ways that hallucinations and misinformation can happen on the back end when we code it, but moreover, what are potential ways that people can get workarounds using this model to benefit themselves and hurt the company, right? And those, I think,
Exactly.
are some important pieces that everyone listening should really keep in mind, in terms of really how do we not just make sure we're avoiding misinformation or fake facts, but also that, we're not also letting our ChatGPT or Gen AI systems get tricked into giving free discounts because of whatever AB policies we may have had in the past.
Absolutely, right? And just one quick thing for me, right? When it comes to customer experience, and we've covered this quite a lot during our podcast, right? Even way back season one, when it comes to the impact of it, right? So really trust erosion, right? Just one bad experience with your chatbot, right, can lose a customer for life. And not just, I think it's not just about AI. It's even with the customer support in reality nowadays, right? With just one bad experience, it can actually be a waterfall effect, right? So that's why there's an episode that we did here at CXplorers podcast for everyone that's listening. Like, what are going to be your early stages, early steps for you to define whether or not, hey, are we fit for a chatbot technology, or are we good enough with just something more back end for our support team to be able to utilize? So those types of information, all those steps, and we've covered that pretty good on this podcast. You guys can listen to it. You can actually have go through that, right? Because you don't just deploy AI and see what sticks, right? It's not, again, going to be a primer paint for you to say that, oh, we have AI, we're using it, right? It's not going to be like a flex thing that you would want to do for your organization. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of considerations that people have to make, right? When we look at reducing trust erosion and giving people, that positive experience, is there's going to be potential operational costs. You're going to have more escalations potentially, different corrections and adjustments, and even training needs to be redone from a frontline facing perspective. Other areas of consideration could potentially even be regulatory risk, right? When we are in finance, healthcare, aviation, or within our company, we serve a lot of energy and utility, right? Really highly
Yeah.
regulated industries, and we can't run the risk of even one hallucination happening, right? Because there's penalties, there's a lot of different things that can happen. Or the worst case scenario is there's a disconnect on someone's power, right? Because of something that the AI committed to and then didn't line up with policies on the back end. And again, all of that, like you mentioned, leads to trust erosion and overall brand equity damage. So I think when we look at different solutions and guardrails, is to kind of sum up some of the points that we talked about, is really have a knowledge grounded AI, right? Using retrieval augmented generation, like you mentioned with RAG,
Yeah.
prompt engineering strategies to reduce hallucinations, and keep human in the loop systems, right? So just
Always.
as call centers have, supervisors, ops managers, support teams, we need to also give that same support to these models as well. I know that the goal is that it's going to save us costs operating wise and that we don't need all of these things. But at the onset of it, for sure, we need to have these guardrails and investments made to make sure that it's being done right. Otherwise, your brand equity is going to get hurt a lot and you're going to lose customers potentially. And you'll never recover from something like that if you don't get it right the first time building these right guardrails.
Absolutely, right. And hallucination, we all know that it's there, but it's definitely solvable with all of the things that the industry is doing right now. But it still pose as a serious problem with a lot of the companies right now trying to utilize large language model for them to be able to build a product, right? Especially that would be actually talking directly to customer, right? So companies, Daniel, they need to find a blend with artificial intelligence efficiency and human reliability. To your point, human in the loop system, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I mean, trust is built through design oversight and most importantly, accountability.
Yeah.
Right. So I think this was a really great topic for us to revisit towards the end of season two, just with all the changes and topics that we've talked about. It's promising to see the improvements that are being made in this space, and that many organizations around the world are really starting to adopt this, and that they're really starting to see a lot of the things we've been talking about in our
Yeah.
podcast, right around, okay, how do we put these guardrails in place? Even when talking with some of our partners and clients as well, it's really about we want to do this right. Let's invest first, to make sure that we're coding, training everything the right way, that we're looking at the back end systems from a quality assurance perspective, from a forecasting, from predictive text perspective, before it gets customer facing, right? And that way we can make sure
Yeah.
that, do we have the processes to supervise the AI? Do we have the processes to give it a closed feedback loop on what's happening? And how do we ensure that, it gives us the desired outcomes, which is ultimately efficiency, right? And I think that's where it's not just a plug and play, set it and forget it. It's no, we need to make that investment, right? When we look at OpenAI, they put a lot of money building this, right? And that's why when I hear, oh, we've got our own Gen AI, I'm like, no, you don't. So I look at your privacy policy, it's based on ChatGPT, right? And every single AI that's like, oh, we've made our own, I was, no, you haven't. I'm like, every time I go through
GPT
your
wrappers.
documents or run your company through GPT, you're still using the ChatGPT model, right? And I think that's the delusion that many people have. It's, well, we can just build our own because all these guys are building their own. I'm like, no, everyone's still using the core Chat GPT feature made by OpenAI, but they're adopting it to their environments. And I think that's really where, if you're adopting to your environment, you need to make sure that it understands your environment and that it's doing things the right way. So that way you're building it with the right oversight and the right measures of accountability into that process.
100%, 100%. And for all of our listeners, if you have any thoughts, right, comments, Daniel and I would love to see what are your take on AI hallucination. Leave us a comment.
For sure. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe. Again, me and Jasper are a bit nerds this way. We love just talking to people. If you even want to chat with us to learn more or kind of expand on certain topics or suggest different things that you might be facing, absolutely just drop it in the comments. And then we can definitely start to look at what we can do on the next episodes to talk about some of the real life problems or challenges that you might be facing with Gen AI or integrating any type of AI within your space.
100%.
Awesome. Thanks, Jasper. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks.